If you're using computers or digital devices generally these days, you just can't avoid the cloud. Even that well-known digital device, the fridge, seems to want to be connected to the cloud. Well, what is it? What's it about? And more importantly, what do you do with it? Even though no one can definitively say when the term actually started, it is probably useful to have a little bit of history concerning it. I remember back in the digital Neanderthal ages of the 90s, we used to draw network diagrams. And when we had two sites that were remote, distant from each other, we used to draw a cloud in the middle, and so that all the comms went into one and out of the other, and we didn't really care what went in or out as long as it got there. So we call that the cloud, and that just seems to have stuck. And that's pretty much a good description of what happens these days with the cloud. We don't care what it does as long as we get what we want out of it. It's a bit nebulous because there are so many things that it can do, but really that's the whole point about the cloud. What is the cloud? Well, in simple terms, it's just some sort of computing resource or device that you have access through the internet that somebody else looks after for you. And that's really why it's so nebulous, because it really could be anything at all. In fact, anything that you can do with a computer potentially can be done in the cloud, and in fact, most things already are. As an example of a cloud resource, you take this disk. If we put it into your desktop computer or your laptop, well, it's a bit big to go into a laptop, we install it and we call it C drive. We give it to Mr. Google and he just collects it with a whole heap of other drives, calls it Google Drive and says, well, we'll share some of that with you. That's what cloud storage is all about. You don't care what he does in getting all of that ready, as long as you've got access to store the files and everything on there when you want it. Why would you use the cloud, and more importantly, why wouldn't you use it? First consideration actually is cost. Sometimes it's cheaper to own, sometimes it's cheaper to rent, and sometimes it's even better if you can get the whole lot free. And the same with the cloud. Most times you get the resources out of the cloud, they're shared and you get economies of scale, which brings the price down. But there are times as well where it is just simply cheaper to own things outright. The second consideration is maintenance, because not only do you have the cost of owning the device, but you've also got the cost of running it and repairs. And then over and above that, you probably have some technical expertise that you would require as well. Now that may or may not be something that you have, and if you do have it, you may or may not have the time to put into that particular expertise. So if you can take that, hive it off to somebody else to look after, you can just go about your normal day-to-day job, whatever that is, knowing all of these sorts of things looked after for you. So maintenance can be a big issue, particularly when you start getting a whole heap of computing resources. Somebody can look after that for you. That's one less thing that you have to do. Next thing to consider is availability. Wherever you have access to the cloud, you actually have access to the cloud resources. So it doesn't matter if you're in your office, you're in somebody else's office, you're at a client, or your whole office is just picked up and moved and gone somewhere else. If you're connected to the cloud, you've still got everything that you had previously. It doesn't matter where you are geographically, it's still all there. That works well when you're out of the office, for example, and you're at a client site and you've got file 1, 2 and 3, and all of a sudden there's a need for a fourth file that you didn't bring with you. If it's in the cloud, there's no issue. You just connect to the cloud and you have access to that file straight away. So availability is a real key point with the cloud. So while availability is one of the biggest benefits in the cloud, it also leads to one of the biggest drawbacks, and that's security. You have to assume that if something's in the cloud and you can get to it, then so also can somebody else, and that someone else may not have your best interests at heart. There's a few things that you can do to deal with this. One is just not use the cloud at all, so you keep everything away from it. At the other extreme, you can just say, well, I don't care who sees this and don't worry about security at all. And what you put in the cloud are things that you don't care if people see. And in between, there is a whole range of options that you can use just depending on the level of sensitivity of the information that you put in the cloud. Another issue connected with availability is the actual connection to the cloud itself. So obviously, if you're not connected to the cloud, you can't get the cloud resources. But it gets a bit more difficult than that because you also need reliable connections to the cloud. Not just things which are sometimes on and sometimes off, or speed up and slow down, depending on where things are at. They can have major impacts on how things work. And some cloud systems are more susceptible to that than others. Cloud availability also involves the speed of access. So when you have something which is outside of your computer, then it has to get into it, and that's just another layer of things which will slow it down. And that just doesn't work with some things. For example, you can see a video and run a video through the cloud, but you can't edit a video on the cloud. You have to have the files locally on your computer. Yet another one of those important issues is legal. From a technical point of view, it really doesn't matter where the server is. It could be in another country completely, as long as you get the data. But from a legal point of view, that could be completely different. There was an agreement that allowed Europeans to store their data over on US servers. But just recently, a European court has ruled that invalid, so now it's no longer legal for Europeans to keep their data on US computers. There are more issues than this, both good and bad, but these will give you a good basis to start from. Regardless of anything else, the starting point is always knowing what it is you're trying to achieve and the expected benefits and dangers so that you can prepare for both. If you know that, then that will actually give you the best chance of success when you encounter the cloud.